As exciting as it can be to watch your children grow up, at some point you also realize that means they're growing away too. Journalist Jan Wong saw that happening and did something remarkable. She tried to make the most of it, and her latest book, Apron Strings, Navigating Food and Family in France, Italy, and China, is the result. She's a veteran journalist and author of several books, and we're pleased to welcome her tonight. It's really nice to meet you.
It's nice to meet you.
So when the idea for this book came about, what was happening in your life?
Well, I'm a professor now of journalism, and I was about to have a sabbatical, my very first, and also my children were growing up.
You've got two sons?
I have two sons, and the first one, Ben, suddenly phoned me and said, I'm going to get married. And I was so shocked. I said, to who? And then I had met the young woman, very, very nice, beautiful, smart, a mathematician. And then a day later, he said, I am getting married. Because I said, no, too early. And then he said, no, I am getting married. And I was so shocked. But what was even more shocking was my immediate demotion from #1 woman in my son's life to #2, which was so far away, I couldn't see #1 anymore. And I had this shock, even though you know your kids are going to be growing up and you want them to get married and you want them to be happy.
When it happens, it's like, no, I'm not ready.
Yeah, I'm not ready.
But you were also concerned because you say that this was, you know, many years before you had met your husband, Norman, in China while studying.
Yeah.
And your parents got on a plane and flew and said, no, you can't do that because you're in a mixed relationship, mixed marriage. And you had the same concerns, but for a different reason.
Yes. Well, Ben threw that in my face. Sam's the name of my younger son. I always cross-call them. Yeah, he threw that in my face, and he said, well, you did the same. But the reason I was concerned about a mixed marriage was because she was a vegetarian.
Not a vegan?
No, and I think this is not fair. Between the announcement of the marriage, that they were going to get married, and the actual date of the deed, she became a vegan. So I was like, oh, God.
What's wrong with vegans?
Well, how much time do you have? I'm an omnivore. I'm a committed omnivore. I love vegetarian food, but I'm a committed omnivore. So this was a mixed marriage for me, unlike my parents who were upset because my husband-to-be was not Chinese. I'm not Chinese either. I'm a Canadian, but, you know.
With Chinese
you know
heritage.
What I'm talking about.
Yes, I know.
And my husband was Caucasian. So my parents were really freaking out about that. And so now, you know, full circle, I'm freaking out because my daughter-in-law-to-be is going to be, well, I thought a vegetarian, but she's a vegan.
A vegan.
Okay, so I'm traumatized. I'm supposed to be the happy mother, right? But I'm not. I'm traumatized, and I'm looking at my only remaining child, Sam, who was 3 years younger than Ben. Ben was 25 then, and Sam was 22. I can never remember their ages. It changes every year. I don't know why.
My kids are 5 and 7, and I always forget.
Yeah, how old? So I look at Sam and I'm going, what's happening?
I've got one more left?
Yeah, like this may be my last chance. So as I'm preparing for my sabbatical, and because I'm a journalist, I think book, I'm thinking Sam book, food, because Sam loves to cook. He's been a chef or a dishwasher, sometimes in restaurants, all throughout his university.
Since he was 16, right?
Yeah, since he was it was his first job, he was doing gardening, but his second job onwards was always cooking. And I thought, maybe I can do something that would force Sam to be with me 24/7.
And he agreed? How did you get him to agree?
No, he didn't agree. So I had this wonderful idea. I said, Sam, France, Italy, China, all expenses paid. We're going to cook our way through those countries. What do you think? He goes, no, I don't think so. And he goes to his job down the street cooking. So I think, okay, how do you do this? Well, when they get to that age, you can't just say, Sam, you're coming with me, the way you can with your kids when they're young. And you just say, we're going here. So I just sort of waited. I kept describing the food in France and Italy and China, and eventually he said yes. And so we left on this big adventure.
And why those 3 countries?
Well, I had to worry about languages because my plan was not to go to cooking school. My plan was to in bed with families.
And learn how to make the traditional foods.
Home cooking.
Mm-hmm. Why home cooking specifically?
Because I don't think people want to read about haute cuisine. I think people are interested in making their own food. And I was interested. I don't want to learn how to make a sauce that I'll never make again. I want to learn how to, what do people in France feed their families for dinner. And I love French food. I love Italian food. I just picked my favorite foods. But I also wanted languages. Mm-hmm. We had to be able to function. So Sam speaks fluent French. I speak unfluent French. I speak fluent Chinese. He spoke unfluent Chinese. And then Italy. And I'm an amateur musician. So, you know, Allegro.
Poco.
Piano. Mm-hmm. I figured I could speak Italian. I can't, but I took a course.
And the families that you stayed with, you didn't seem to have very much difficulty with the families that you stayed in Italy and France. But in China, it was a bit more difficult. Why?
Well, in each case, we didn't know the families, and I used my journalist contacts to get in. In France, we knew them a little, but really didn't know them. So in China, my family fell through because the lady got pregnant and changed her mind, understandably. So at last minute, I got 3 rich families. I was a little worried because I wasn't sure how it would work. I thought, okay, great, I'll cook with the maids. They all had maids. And that would be fine. I'd learn the home cooking through the maids. But it turned into this really awkward but fascinating situation of 3 rich ladies who are treating their maids horribly. And so we got into this class warfare. And for us, because we were working with the maids, we saw the transformation of the maid who would be an intelligent person, a nice, normal person, but when the lady of the house came in, she would just hunch over and put this stupid look on her face and, you know, sort of look like a oppressed person.
Why do you think they did that?
Because part of the job in China with the new rich is that you have to show you're really servile. You can't just be doing your job, you have to show servility. So they got double pay, by the way. To be a maid, you got twice as much pay as you would if you worked in a factory. But in a factory, you didn't get abused. You had your shift and you did your job. And some of the maids talked to me about it. They said, you know, I could work in a factory and I wouldn't be putting up with this stress. But they wanted to make money too.
And they were migrants, most of them.
Yes, I forgot to say that they weren't local Shanghainese. We were in Shanghai. These were Chinese who came from the hinterland. Sometimes they left their own kids at home, and they would come and be the maid and the nanny to these rich people in Shanghai. But they were socking away their pay, and they had a very clear game plan. They were buying a house in their village. They were going to open their own business. So in a way, they were just another facet of the get-rich-quick society that China had become. But really, Sam was in the interesting position because unlike the other places, the friend who got me into the houses, she said to them, Sam will be your private Western chef. That wasn't the deal. That wasn't the deal at all. But I said to Sam, you have to man up. And he goes, oh, okay, you know. So he was getting up at the crack of dawn to make eggs Benedict for the spoiled brat 12-year-old girl.
Who wasn't eating the food.
Who would get up and look at him and, nah, I don't want that. And she'd go and get Nutella and put it on her bread and go to school. And Sam's looking at me and it's like, welcome to my world. Now you know what it's like to be a mom.
And being around all these different families, it's kind of like you see all the family secrets.
Oh, yeah.
What was that like, too? Because even in France, when you were in France and in Italy, that same thing happened.
Well, I tell my students, well, when I was a journalism student many, many years ago, our professor told us we have a live-in project, meaning you have to move in with the people. And I was in New York studying, and nobody in New York would let you move in. But the point was you had to spend a lot of time with people. And I know that living with these families was crucial to understanding. If I had just showed up every day at dinner time with my notebook, I wouldn't have got the same story. By living with them, I could see the cracks in the facade of a happy family. For instance, in Italy, the family that we were with, they seemed really happy, and the grandfather would come for dinner. But then the grandfather invited us to his house, and we noticed that the granddaughter, Kiara, had to ask him where the bathroom was. And Sam gives me this look. Sam is observant, and sometimes he reinforces. And he gives me this look like she doesn't know where the bathroom is. And then when we went home, they told us a story that they're estranged from the grandfather because the sister is managing the grandfather because she wants all the money. And they were crying when they told me, you know, the husband of the family in Italy had brain surgery for cancer, and you know the sister didn't even. So it isn't what you see. It isn't what it seems. And I think that's true of most happy families. Their reality is not what they project to the outside. That families are complicated and relations are complicated. So I cheered them up by telling them my own terrible family.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you next, because
you can't beat my family story.
Because in your family, like all families, has its complications, and yours might be a bit more public than others.
Yes.
So being in that situation with your son, what did you learn about yourself?
Well, first of all, my son is almost invulnerable to being written about because I've written about him his whole life. Many people said, how does Sam feel about this? Because it's very revealing of him too. Mm-hmm. And some journalists have made a rule, they don't write about their families, but I feel that the best journalism is when you can really tell something truthful. And so I write about my family, I write about myself, as honestly as I can, so that my own family problems are in there in the book also. Because, you know, most people don't want to talk about it. If you have a crazy brother who's like throwing paint on your front door, this is my story. So when the Italian family started crying and saying, you know, I'm estranged from my sister, you know, my father doesn't invite us over anymore, I pulled up my cell phone, I said, let me show you something. And they stopped crying. I showed them the pictures of my front door, and they stopped crying. But in this book, it's not just about food, it's about family. And in China, you know, I found that the families are being estranged from their parents because of money. A lot of it comes down to money. They don't see eye to eye with their parents anymore. Their parents are the Cultural Revolution generation. Mm. They don't really like their kids getting bespoke cashmere dresses. You know, they don't really like to see that. So there's an estrangement. And I saw that one of the grandparents was sick, so we went to visit him in the hospital with one of the rich Tai-Tais, and she almost forgot to visit her father.
You had to remind her.
I had to remind her. We went to buy flowers for her garden, like hundreds of pots, which the gardeners were gonna. Then we went to buy pearls. Then we went to get her cashmere stuff, and Sam's getting really hungry. So I said, you know, can we get something to eat? Because she's not eating, right, for the cashmere dress. And then she said, no, okay, well, then we'll go home. And I said, but you're gonna visit your father. And she went, oh yeah, I forgot. So we saw the father, and he was in a ward. He was in a public ward. And I said, well, is it expensive? And she said, I don't know. And it's like, Sam gives me another look, like, she's not paying. Whereas in France and Italy, they were taking care of the grandparents, even though the father in Italy was estranged. The other grandfather lived with the family. And I asked them who owned the house. The grandfather owned the house. And I said, well, when did you move in? And she said, well, we came to take care of him because he broke his leg. And I said, well, when was that? She said, 9 years ago.
Oh, yeah. They
9 years ago, yeah.
And then you have a family like, is it Jean Salem?
Yeah, the Jean Selms in France.
In France. I mean, they are saintly.
Unbelievable.
They're helping undocumented migrants.
Yes.
The father actually leaves and goes into dangerous countries. He went to Afghanistan.
Syria.
Syria. Like, he actually goes there to rescue people.
Yes. And they adopted. They had several biological kids of their own, and when the kids were about 10 and 12, they adopted two handicapped children with Down syndrome who were still there. They're young adults, like, you know, they're still taking care of them. Mm-hmm.
And Marie Catherine was also, her mother
yes,
lived with
Marie
them.
Catherine's mother was bedridden. was 93 years old. So we had this, in France, it was amazing. We landed in this house with 4 Georgian refugees from Georgia, undocumented. There had previously been Syrian and Iraqis, and, you know, it was an old farmhouse. And so people were sleeping all over the house. Mammy had a room. She was a grandmother, very, very ailing. And then the 2 dancing. So it was this wild, and I didn't expect it. I had no idea. And at the beginning, Sam and I were doing the cooking because nobody was functioning. Everybody was busy helping people. And then the housekeeper came, and the housekeeper was a master chef, Bernadette.
Well, I thought it was really interesting, the relationship between Marie Catherine and her mother. She would get up at night and take care of her. So she was parenting her parent and also parenting her children.
Right.
In the end, your son actually ends up helping Mammy, and in a way to just get some relief for Marie Catherine.
Yes, Marie Catherine was having a nervous breakdown because she wasn't getting any sleep.
When you saw all that, did it make you think about your own mortality and what it would be like when you get older with your children?
Well, I think boomers are all worried now about what's going to happen when they get old and frail. And I don't know if I can count on my children. I think that's the reality because I don't know where they're going to end up living. But I did see this moment with Sam. He was sleeping in a salon on the main floor because Marie Catherine offered, I was in a huge bedroom. I was in her daughter's bedroom with multiple beds because they were always putting people up. And she said to Sam, Sam, you can sleep here with your mother, or you can sleep in one of the salons downstairs. So of course, he picks the salon, which happens to be next to a salon where Mamie is sleeping. So Sam would hear her at night because there was an archway between the 2 rooms, but it had been blocked by a bookcase. So there was privacy, but you could hear everything. So when Marie Catherine started getting migraines, and he said to her, she had a baby monitor in Mamie's room. So he said to Marie Catherine, turn off the baby monitor. I hear her anyway. I'll get up and look after Mamie. And so he did. And he was very nice about it. And he would stay with Mamie for an hour the first night. You know, she wants to get out of bed. And he says, no, Mamie, you can't get out of bed. You have to sleep. And the second night, he only spent 20 minutes. He was training her. But what it showed me was he's got a good soul. And maybe if I'm old and sick, he'll be nice to me like he was to Mamie. I don't know. But I think it's a question I was trying to answer in the book. In these 3 countries, how do people look after the older generation? And in France and Italy, it was pretty good. In China, it was like, whoa, this country really has changed because none of them had contact with their parents. And even if one spouse wanted to, the other spouse would say no, partly because we don't want to be responsible for their medical bills. It was like, whoa, this huge change in society in China, which always honored the generations, was changing right before my eyes.
And then there's a passage that you write that I want to read that kind of sums up the relationship between mothers and sons. And you write, when you raise your children, you hope they become independent. Paradoxically, when they do, you feel abandoned. Daughters, however, stay close even after they leave home. They come back to hang out with you at the mall or sit around the table and yak. They call or text frequently, perhaps daily, even as they secretly dread growing up to become your clone. At the same time, mothers and daughters negotiate constant friction, an unspoken rivalry, a one-upmanship about the best way, say, to bake a cake or soothe a baby. Sons rarely become rivals because they are too different from their moms. Our XX and XY chromosomes mean we're not and never can be the same. If all goes well, we bond not as competitors, but as mutually sustaining allies. Now, being the mother of 2 sons, you point out that you still have a special bond with them because sons are exquisitely attuned to their mothers. How is that?
I think the time that Sam and I traveled together, I really felt like he knows what I'm thinking and I know what he's thinking. And we became very, very close. It was not perfect. We had a huge fight in Bologna after we finished France and Italy. We were so tired. We had this huge fight, but in a way, the fight was very interesting because it was such a dramatic fight that you'd think that we would never speak to each other again. But after about 24 hours, I realized our bond is there, and it can take that kind of upheaval, and it just fuses us together even more strongly. And the interesting thing is, I think that Sam is very much like me. I think he accepts that too. I think he pointed it out. And we're both kind of surprised by that. And
why are you surprised by that?
Well, I just think, why would he want to be anything like me?
What's wrong with you? Why wouldn't he?
I'm kind of annoying, and I'm kind of interested, and I'm always looking at things. I don't know. I never, when I was...
But you wouldn't say that about him, though.
No, I wouldn't. I think he's really nice. But I just never expected boys to be like
their mothers.
Yeah. I always thought that daughters could be like their mothers, but I was really surprised. And you know, he's the one who pointed out to me that Ben, his older brother, is like my husband. So I thought, we never expected that. I don't know why. Because when your kids are growing up, you just look at them like they're their own little being, and you don't realize that they're absorbing all this stuff from you. You don't really see it. You think they're never going to learn to do something, or they're never going to get somewhere on time, and then they just grow up, and they're fun. But it's true what I said about daughters contacting you daily, and sons never contact you. And you know, Sam is in China, and he was traveling, and we get one line, "I'm back, I'm back." And daughters don't do that, right?
Well, you made the observation in the book that there were times when Sam actually was guiding you to do the right thing.
Yes. He is observant, which is good, and helpful, and he would say things, sometimes to calm me down. At one point, he said, you know what, we can't write. You can't use the Jan Selm's real name. And I went, oh, you're right. So I went downstairs the next morning and I talked to Francois and I said, I can't use your names. And I don't want to do that. I have to use real names, but you're going to get arrested because you're harboring undocumented migrants. And then he said, no, 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 you use our real names. This is why. He said, when is the book going to come out? Then he said, because the European High Court on Human Rights said France cannot prosecute a French citizen who's helping someone in need. So, you know, if Sam hadn't said that, I wouldn't have even known. First of all, I was not thinking about danger to the Jan Selms. That's the first thing. And secondly, I wouldn't have known about the French law, which is very revealing about France, and the European court, right? So there's lots of information. He would note things down. He would take lots of pictures. He was really a helpful companion. And I think if I had just gone with somebody else, wouldn't have been the same. He really was helping on the book.
He didn't come back with you. What happened at the end of the book, at the end of the trip?
It ends in China. After Shanghai, we do a little quick travel, and then he wants to stay and study Chinese, and I want him to stay too, so we part. And it's kind of horrible because somebody helps me, one of my old McGill classmates helps me set him up in the city called Tianjin, which is a city of more than 10 million people that you've never heard of, near Beijing. So my friend has a chauffeur in Beijing drive us. We drive to Tianjin. They take him right away because of my friend's guanxi, his connections with this university. So Sam gets right in, gets in the dorm, and then my friend suddenly says, we gotta go. And I'm like, I'm already feeling awful because I'm gonna be separated. I'm feeling a little fragile and shaky. I know Sam's 22, but still. My friend says, we gotta go. Why? Because his Beijing license plates mean that we have to get out of the Tianjin city limits by 5 p.m. or we're dead. We have to pull over by the side of the road and wait. And so I don't have time to like check out Sam's dining room or thump his mattress or, you know, do those stupid mother things.
Or see the cafeteria.
Yeah, it's like, and my friend's dragging me out, and Sam's happy. Like, God, thank God she's leaving, you know. But he does the nice thing. He comes out and he stands there and he just sort of waves.
Well, you joke that Sam carries around a wallet that's made out of duct tape, and it might be hard for him to find a girlfriend. But have you thought about what will happen when he finds the one?
Yeah. Well, yeah, all the Chinese people were saying, Sam, you're a real catch, you're a real catch, because basically he has a passport and a pulse, right? But he always shows them, you know, his wallet, meaning he's poor. And they're all horrified. It looks like pulled out a rodent. They don't think it's cute at all. I do think about it. And I ask him, do you have a girlfriend? He says, no. And I don't know if he would really tell me, seeing as he saw me reacting to Ben. He was actually on the phone with me, calming me down. Oh, because I didn't say this. Ben didn't want me to come down for the wedding in LA. And I was just, what are you talking about? It wasn't a wedding. He said, it's just paperwork, don't come. And I was like, what are you talking about? I want to be there. And no. It's complicated, and as I said, families are complicated, and her family couldn't come.
So you couldn't come?
So Ben said, if you go, she'll be sad, and that's what I mean when I said I was down to number 2. And
so basically, when Sam gets married, he's having a big wedding, whether or not he likes it, right?
I said to Sam, I phoned Sam, he was at Queens, and I said, Sam, what am I going to do? I said, Sam, you got to promise you'll invite me to your wedding. And he said, oh, Mom, I forgot to tell you I got married last week. So Sam will be fine, and I'm over it.
Jan, it's been an absolute pleasure. Great book.
Thank you very much.
And as a mother to a young son, not sleeping, I will enjoy these moments.
The Agenda with Steve Bacon is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.